All right, time for another Trllp short story from An Editor's Tales, which was published as a collection in 1870. This is Jsphn de Mntmnnc, a short story that was published in 1869, and indeed is another. It is another editor's tale, though this time it has a little preface at the beginning where the narrator says, "Oh, this was some different editor, some other lady, and I've changed all the names and times and stuff like that, so it can't be traced," and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a distancing thing here. Though, like our stories before, Mary Greasley story before, this one is about the editor is, publishing his magazine, and he gets a letter from a young lady signing herself as Jsphn de Mntmnnc, saying, my name may sound French to you, or it sounds like Italian to me, but French to you, but it's actually, I'm an English woman, and I have written a novel in 3 volumes, which the publishers that I have talked to, publishers XYZ, have said that it needs to get published in a magazine, serially in a magazine first, before they would publish it as a novel. And shall I send it to you? And it is very kind of confident letter, stuff like that. And he's like, I don't have time for other novels. I have no idea who you are. Yeah, thanks. And it's like, it's probably not, for my magazine and stuff like that. And she kind of writes back another letter saying, very haughty. It's like, well, you'll be lucky if you get this thing. It's a very high quality and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, it's like, okay, it's kind of a interesting thing. So he says, okay, you can bring it to me on this day. I have business hours on this day. And she says like, I'll send, I'm not going to bring it in. And, it's again, very high handed. And it's like, why are you only one day of the thing? And he's like, and it's like, look, okay, send it to me on, whatever day and stuff like that. She does finally send it to him, and it's called what? Not So Black as He's Painted, which he settles down and reads and finds fairly, it's not of a high quality. It's one of these things of like, if he had just gotten it in a thing, whether it's man or woman, probably wouldn't have paid attention to it. Probably would have tossed it after the first couple of pages. But because it's kind of got an interesting story behind it, he's kind of got a little bit of an adventure going here. Like, I'm sort of interested in stuff. He does actually read the whole thing through. And he finds it's like 50% is actually, it's quite good. And then there's another 50% which he finds sort of basically kind of metaphysical twaddle. I think he calls this is like, what is it? It's a human devil, a story of a human devil with a kind of a Byronic apology, with a kind of a very elaborate apology for this guy. Sort of like, what is a thief? What is a murderer? Is there really such thing as kind of like a lot of metaphysical, as he says, twaddle? And he says, but it's kind of interesting as just like his viewpoint as an editor, because you get kind of that nuts and bolts of like, if this was a short piece, I could see kind of devoting some time to it because it wouldn't take me that long to kind of like, okay, we're going to chop out this stuff and here you can kind of fix this thing up there and you can kind of hone your stuff. But like an entire 3-volume novel of this stuff, this would be like a year of my time. It would not really be worth it to me to get this to the state where it would be actually publishable in his magazine. And he also is like, how well would it be to actually will I be able to actually convince the very high-handed kind of woman thing? And he says like, look, I've read it. It's got stuff in it that is okay. I would like to meet with you and talk to you about it in person. And, eventually a woman does arrive. He actually does. He's like, oh, that's the address. And he kind of snoops around and he sees like, oh, there's a kind of a pretty young woman. And she's talking to like what looks like her husband and stuff like that. And indeed, so he's kind of scoped out the situation. It's like, oh, she's kind of cute kind of thing, but she's married. And but it's like, oh, okay, like I'll invite her over. She arrives. And it turns out, actually, no, she is not the authoress. She is the sister-in-law of the authoress. And it's like, okay, you're Mrs. Puffle. That's who it turns out. So how is this Jsphn de Mntmnnc? And it's like, it's apparently it's complicated. And he's like, okay. Well, like I really need to meet her in person because I have to suss her out and see if like she's going to be at all someone you could basically kind of, I think, work with. And he's also just he's curious. Again, this is sort of an editor's adventure sort of thing. And so he finally does gets to meet her. And it's this young woman, 25, but she's most definitely an invalid, bit of a weak chin kind of thing. But she's got a spark in her eye. And I mean, and she's sort of like, it's like, well, it's going to need a lot of editing. It's like, it's like, kind of like, no, it's a work of genius. I'm not going to kind of cut it down to make it suitable for your magazine. It's like, well, then I'm not really going to publish it in my magazine. But he's kind of, he has kind of toyed with them, saying like, oh, I know who your husband is, Mrs. Puffle, because he'd met her and kind of probably done some investigating. But so in the end, he actually does very quickly at the end there. They just says like, oh, I talked to the publishers and they did publish it. And the narrator says, like, I never read it, but apparently, according to reviews, it was a great success. So I don't know if that means that the Jonathan what is his name, Jonathan Brown, who's the name given to this editor, whether he did actually tinker with it a bit, or if XYZ publisher did like publish it as is and stuff. So it's another one of these stories where it's kind of Trllp. It's like, how editors treat women writers versus male writers. I mean, I guess it's like if you're pretty or you're kind of got an intriguing story, you can kind of suck in an editor, even if maybe the actual writing itself wouldn't actually stand up. Though, I mean, it was one of these things where it seems like at least half the story he thought was like quite good. I can't help but think of maybe someone like George Eliot in this, even though I haven't read much George Eliot, of the whole idea of like, oh, there's half good and there's half metaphysical twaddle. I can think of maybe someone like Trllp kind of maybe viewing someone like George Eliot's work that way. So that are interesting thoughts. I really did enjoy the whole thing of like an editor and like how an editor would weigh stuff. And it's like, look, it's like if this was a small piece, I could help you. I could hone. You can see why like they maybe for like young writers, they like write short pieces because then we can work on a short piece and you can get good at doing short pieces, because if you write a gigantic novel, then we have to fix the entire novel. Whereas if you can do your training stuff with short stories, and get good at that, then by the time you move to doing full-size novels, you're not going to make all the rookie mistakes that the beginner writer would make on this other stuff. At least that's the general idea I got. I mean, this is at least a bit of a step up from Mary Greasley, where he's slightly admitting that this woman does have some talent in her works and stuff like that. So that's a step up for Trllp in how he's maybe viewing female writers. It's always bad if you like say, oh well, he treated Mary Greasley this way, so that's obviously how Trllp feels about all female writers. So here's Jsphn or Marianne Puffle, and this is how he views her writing. And actually, she didn't have to give up the writing profession like Mary Greasley did, or Lady Carberry did. She actually did publish a novel to what the review said was great success. Good, to quite success. So, I don't know if that's also, maybe that is Trllopian irony. There's a lot of talk in here of like Jsphn saying like, well, I think my novel's good. I think that I've seen a lot worse ones get published, which, Trllp might have that attitude of, yeah, there's a lot of crap that gets published and as a success, doesn't mean it's good. I could see someone like Trllp saying that, and I mean, indeed, there's so much of that stuff that is in publishing that gets published and isn't that good, and is quite easily forgotten. I mean, even with Trllp, we remember his the big series and maybe a couple of his standalone novels, but it's probably extreme geeks like me who are reading like stuff like The Editor's Tales and still talking about them today. So yeah, that's my thoughts about Jsphn de Mntmnnc, and we will continue along with reading the editor's tales as the month goes by in my very lonely Trllp short story-a-thon. And it's not a thon; it's just my lonely Trllp short story month. While Steve Donahue is working on Boswell with the fellows over at Mayberry Book Club, and the other terribly named but really interesting guy who's talking about Boswell's Life of Johnson, and this one about quite how cutting Boswell is about Johnson in his personal life, and his just like how he bears himself. It was quite interesting. It almost makes me want to pick up Boswell again, but not quite, because I know I would never ever be able to keep up with that within 1 month of the year, not without abandoning everything else I'm reading, which sorry Steve, I'm not doing. All right, more videos later.